Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is Razer's vibrating butt cushion, otherwise known as Razer Freyja. Now, Freyja was a concept from Razer a couple of years ago that is now a reality. It's a cushion that sits on your gaming chair, so you can see it here on the Razer Enki, and then provides you with haptic feedback based on the experience of what's happening in game. The idea being creating an immersive experience from your games with the addition of vibrations in your back and legs to lead to a more interesting gaming experience. So this is something that I've been using for a little while now, so grab a cup of tea and sit back and relax and listen to me as I tell you about how I've tested it and what the experience has been like across a number of different games. First of all, I want to tell you it's actually quite comfortable as an addition to the seat, but then when you get into obviously how to record and put across the visuals of what haptic feedback looks like in a chair, that actually became quite difficult, because I actually recorded here, for example, when it was vibrating quite aggressively and you can't really see it. So coming up with an idea of how to put this across on camera was quite tricky. But what I'm going to do is basically talk to you about my experiences with a variety of games with a number of different settings. You'll notice that I'm also using the Kraken V4 Pro, which also has haptic feedback. I'm going to do a separate video on that to talk about the experience with that, because it's quite different. But in this video I want to talk to you about what this has been like to use and some of the quirks of the system. It might seem a bit gimmicky, but what I want to say initially is it's actually very impressive in a number of ways. Now, it comes packaged in the usual sort of setup from Razer, complete with stickers and eco-friendly boxes, and there's not much included here because it makes for a fairly straightforward setup. So you'll notice that there's a power cable that comes out of the rear, and then you have a number of straps to set it up on the chair. By the way, I'm using the Razer Enki in this video, but Razer says it will fit with a variety of different gaming chairs, so don't worry if you don't have a Razer chair. You'll see that the power brick comes with a number of adapters, so it work in different countries, but I'm obviously using the superior British one. And then one thing to note here is that this cable is quite short, which I'll show you in a second, that I found frustrating. And then you have the 2.4 GHz dongle, which allows you to then connect the chair and control it with Razer's Synapse software. So the installation is pretty obvious. Basically a cushion that just sits over your chair in the normal way. And then you just need to strap it in to make sure it stays in place and secure it, plug it in, and then connect up that dongle. So there are a number of straps that run across the back. 2 straps there and then 1 across the bottom so you can secure it, and you can see how that straps in here. And again, this should fit on most gaming chairs unless you have particularly problematic bulges, but you can see obviously the Enki sticks out along the sides anyway and still straps on pretty nicely there. This obviously goes nicely with the Enki because it's got the same green Razer stitching along the edges of it, so it kind of matches the aesthetic, but that's a minor point. Now, the power cable plugs in on the left-hand side of the chair. This was an issue for me because the plugs I was planning on using were actually behind me and to the right of where I sit and game, but as you can see, the cable's pretty short, so it actually ends where those drawers are on the left-hand side of the screen, and makes for a very short cable, which could be an issue for some people. I found this a little bit of a problem in my space, but maybe if you've got a plug on the left of your chair, it won't be an issue. However, the installation to the PC is much more straightforward because it's just using a wireless dongle, so you don't need to worry about any extra cables plugging into your computer, which is obviously a benefit. Then it powers on with a switch on the left-hand side here that you can press, and then the Razer logo lights up to let you know that it's on. One thing I've noticed is it doesn't seem to power off on its own, so you do need to remember to turn it off when you're finished using it. But that's the basic setup, and then you need to make sure you've got the latest version of Synapse so you can download, install that, and set it up, and then get going with the settings. And now I'm going to tell you about my experiences. It dawned on me that it's pretty hard to sort of put across in video what this is going to be like as an experience using Freyja, because recording the vibrations is pretty tricky. So the following clips are basically going to be me describing what the experience is like in a variety of games to talk to you about how it feels and the experience you get from them. I also want to basically leave this window at the top so you can see what's going on and what mode I've selected. So you can see that this actually gives you a graph of the experience, but also you get a very different experience depending on whether you've selected controlled, balanced, dynamic or custom presets because it gives you different haptics experience for each. And I'll go into a bit of depth of that separately and talk about what each one does. But what I found is sometimes it means that the rumble and effect that you get is very subtle, and in other times it's very aggressive. Sometimes perhaps too much, sometimes it's distracting, sometimes it's a wide balance between being very subtle and being suddenly very intense, which then means obviously you're getting a more engaging experience, a more immersive one. I wanted to start by just showing you that it can obviously impact music as well. Now with music, it's pretty interesting because there's a rumble basically constantly. In this tune here, I can feel it in my back of my legs prominently initially at the start here. It's rumbling all around, but it sort of spreads around across. It's not just in one place, it's in multiple places. So in the inner sort of underneath of your leg, spreading out to the outside of it, and then it's also rumbling in my lower back, and it's pounding in you in various different ways. And you can see from the graph the different effects that this can have, and then you can then change between, because this is obviously on dynamic. You can set it to balance mode instead. Now if I change it to balance mode, it's suddenly hitting me harder in the back of the legs and makes quite a difference there. You can see the gain levels are slightly different there as well. Controlled adjusts it again as well and changes what's going on there. So each of these has a difference. Now with music, not feeling a massive difference between it. The dynamic one, you suddenly feel it more in the Kraken headset than with the others. So in those modes, I'm barely feeling that at all. But with the dynamic one, you feel more of a punch. Now, I'll go into the haptics on this headset in the headset review, but essentially just adds to the bass. It makes you feel like you've got that thump of the subwoofer happening in here. But with the Freyja, obviously, it's a very different experience. Now, as someone that suffers with back pain, having that rumble in your back is a really welcome relief from pain. And it actually acts like a massager of sorts, but it also adds to the music. You feel like you're getting the thumping bass and the tunes going in, and it's really nice. So Stalker 2 is meant to have Razer's sensor HD compatibility at some point. Currently, at the time of making this video, it's marked as coming soon, so it's not really sure when that's going to release. So what I'm going to do now is basically just talk about the experience of what it's like with the audio. Now, obviously, this is a very immersive game. Highly recommended, by the way, if you've not checked it out. It's brilliant. And haptics could in theory add to that quite a bit. Under the controlled setting here, basically not feeling much at all and just generally moving around. If I run, I can feel like a little tiny thump in my lower back. Otherwise it doesn't really make much difference. If you shoot a shotgun though, which is now jammed on me, it definitely vibrates through there and you do feel it. So you do feel that happen. So if you're doing something like this where you're moving on a more solid surface and like a jump, you can actually feel the sort of thunk into the back quite substantially, which is obviously beneficial. If there's environmental noise, you can also feel sort of shaking. So when there's a sort of background noise right now, I can feel that rolling around in my lower back and makes it feel more eerie. So the thing with a game like Stalker is the environmental sounds are really important, and you'll get a lot of sort of environmental noises that indicate, you know, areas of radiation or areas of interest or other things. And with this, on the haptics, you can just feel it. So there's these sort of rumbling noises right now from these anomalies in front of me. And obviously the louder the sound gets, the more the rumbling happens. It gets more intense as you go towards them and into them and getting pushed around by them. In this controlled mode, it's quite hard in the lower back, but obviously it's gone from basically nothing, because running around over here, if I'm at this far, there's nothing, there's no haptics at all, to quite intense. So this actually adds really well to the intensity of the game and the immersion, because it feels like I'm generally being pushed around by these anomalies, which is pretty cool. Interestingly, if I put it in dynamic, I can feel it more in the headset, because this is the haptics headset on this as well, obviously. I feel that start to rumble around as well. But maybe it's a little less intense in my back, just ever so slightly. But it's moving around, so it's in my lower to middle back and tickling at my legs, but it's more in the back area than anywhere else at the moment, which is pretty cool. sort of freaky environmental noises really just rumble around. She adds to it because it's quite creepy, this game, in various ways. So when you've got this rumbling in your back as well, the hairs are standing on end on the arms, and then you've got the horrible rumbling. When you fire a gun, you can feel that impact as well. Controlled mode's working really well in this game. I don't know what's going on. I've been chased by some sort of weird demon things. So with balanced, you feel there are environmental sounds right now, but I can really feel the footsteps a lot more. I think perhaps too much. Just cut myself. So just sort of running around in the environment here. Just each sort of step I'm taking, I can feel it hitting in my back. And then obviously if you run faster, the comes into the back of the legs. It actually rumbles more in the back than in the legs. I think this might be too much, depending on your personal preference. Because if you imagine basically vibrating all the time you're walking or running, it makes sense. Because if you're out in the world like this doing this, it probably would be like that. But I think it might be a bit too intense. I prefer, I think, the sort of more dynamic feelings. But if we come back across Anomaly, so this is the same one as earlier, but I can just feel it start to kick in a lot harder and it rumbles really nicely. But balance is definitely there more than the other modes, but at least more than controlled. So switching into dynamic mode, obviously this says that maximizes immersion. Action-packed events will feel more vivid and present. So with this one, walking is a very subtle sort of thump, 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 thump. But when you start to run, you can feel it pounding a bit more. Basically, the walking's not as present as with the balance mode, I don't think. So it's not constantly there as much. It's not as noticeable, but it definitely is there. So controlled is better if you don't want to feel constant footsteps, I think, in this game. But with this, I can feel... So here, where this anomaly is, there's a light tingle in the back of my legs, and then quite a solid rumble in my lower back. And then as I get closer, it's spreading out further, becoming quite aggressive. And then obviously it eases out again once I get out of it. Nearly killed myself for the sake of that. And then you're back to basically nothing again once you've got out of that situation. So that's the way it makes it feel more vivid in there, and then back to a more peaceful sort of light thunk for the just general running around. It's interesting though, because it's like being hit in the back when you're walking. It's quite a curious feel. So this is 7 Days to Die, a zombie survival game, and as you can see, I'm on a motorbike. Now, I've got it in controlled mode, first of all. I want to talk to you about what the experience is like there, because basically I can't feel anything. There's no rumble at all here from this. And then basically I want to switch between these and show you the difference. So now if I switch into balance mode, suddenly I can feel the back of my legs pounding near my bottom and a little bit lower. Now it moves around a little bit, and you can also feel it in the lower to mid back, and it's vibrating around in various different ways. Now obviously as the sound changes as you're going over the environment, then the experience changes and it vibrates a little bit more aggressively, but it is constantly there. I think if you are riding around on a motorbike all the time over a long distance, you probably find this a bit too much, a bit too intense. And that's the idea between the different modes, because it means that you can change between them. So if I change onto dynamic now, you get a different experience. Now I can't really feel it. There's nothing of note there. And then there's an occasional blip, so you'll occasionally feel a little bit of a rumble. If there is any rumbling, it's very subtle. Now obviously this is based exclusively on the audio in the game. The game is not programmed for it. It's not on the list of compatible games. So it is just based on that audio, which makes it pretty interesting and will vary wildly from game to game and depending on what you're doing. Doing something like this, we're using an impact driver to loot you'd think you'd get vibrations out of it because it's a vibratey thing, but because it's based on the sound, just plain not getting anything out of it, at least on the controlled setting. Switch to balance is a different story, and suddenly I'm feeling it a lot more than I would be before. So it's rumbling every time you hit it. Every time you bash anything, you can feel a rumble. Quite aggressively, it rolls in and out on the lower back and the back of the legs quite nicely and well, and also get it for simple things. So just anything doing here, basically bashing through the various different things it's doing it. For dynamic, it's just that little bit more subtle, and that's the idea here. It's meant to help with the spatial awareness and that of the environment. So here I am with guns, and obviously there's going to be some shooting here, so if you don't like seeing zombies getting shot, I'd recommend fast forwarding. But essentially, we're going to start with controlled, and bear in mind, I'm going to start with a suppressed weapon as well. So if I just fire it off in this environment, I feel just a small little hit in the lower back. It's minimal, and even more so with the pistol, where it makes even less sound. So you're just shooting that off, it's barely doing anything. That's obviously in controlled mode, though. If we switch to balance, suddenly it's punching a little bit harder in the lower back and the back of my legs, and you can feel it a bit more substantially. Dynamic mode, it's even more sort of aggressive with those shots. I can really feel it, and it feels like there's more going on there. Now, obviously, this is going to vary wildly depending on the weapons. Actually, you'd think a shotgun would give you more of a punch, but it doesn't. In controlled mode, the shotgun's giving me nothing. So with an SMG, obviously you can feel it more, constantly. It does actually feel like a gun, a machine gun, is being shot. Obviously I'm only feeling it in my back rather than like my arms, but you are getting that experience of the constant shots being fired off, and it feels a bit more sort of like it's hitting. Switch to balance mode. It's maybe a little bit less aggressive. It's really hard to describe what it feels like, basically. But in each of those, gunshots seem to make more of a distance, so you really do feel the gunfire when you're shooting a weapon in this environment. Now we're in Need for Speed Unbound. Obviously, with a racing game with a powerful car, you're expecting some beefy vibrations from this. What I'm actually getting in the controlled one, with this car anyway, is some subtle rumbles as we accelerate, and a little bit more every time there's a gear change in the lower to mid back and the front of the back of my legs. So I'm just feeling that as I drive around in this environment, doing that there. Yeah, that's in control though, obviously. And if you hit things, then naturally you feel like the thunk of things you've hit as well. You switch to balance mode and it's suddenly a lot more powerful. You can really feel the rumbles now, and it's a lot more constant, so it's basically constantly doing it. So maybe, I suppose, if you want that experience of feeling like the engine is throbbing and you're just bombing it along, then you're definitely getting it from the balance mode, where it's just constant. I think if you were playing like this for hours and hours though, you'd probably find that it's too much. You probably find that you've been vibrated a bit too long. So if you're planning a long gaming session, you might well find this is too much, but actually it feels really good. It makes sense in the feelings of it. Slam the brakes on, you can feel that punching. Come to a complete stop, and I can still feel it. So it's still vibrating, but it's not vibrating in the legs anymore, it's vibrating mid-back. So it's just like the little bit of the engine noise is just there still. Maybe the environmental sounds. But as soon as you start to accelerate, everything just lights back up on the back. You just feel it throbbing away really nicely there. And we switch to dynamic. Dynamic is a little bit more subtle. It's not throbbing quite as hard, but it is constant. So it's just a lighter bit of vibration throughout, with some heavy punches occasionally. And if you smash into things, there's more of it. More of that, and feel more of the action. But the dynamic is perhaps just a little bit less crazy than the balance mode, which seems to be constant, but you definitely are feeling it still. And dynamic even says to switch to controlled for less haptic feedback, so If you want more from your driving games, then use the balance or dynamic mode, probably between those. Otherwise, you want to go to the controlled one. Now, because it's based on audio, again, Escape from Tarkov is going to be a different experience depending on what weapons you've got. So you can see I've got a suppressed weapon here. I've also got a backup, which isn't. I'm going to start on controlled mode. Now, my first experience with actually playing Tarkov like this was it's very subtle, depending on what setting you're obviously on. And you can't really feel anything. So if I'm running around like this, for example, with the footsteps on controlled mode, you basically can't feel anything. There's no vibrations at all coming through, which is good because you really don't want to be distracted in this game anyway. You need to be paying attention to what's happening, and I don't want to hear thud, 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 or feel thud, thud, thud anyway in my back when I'm trying to work out where the enemy are. You know, start with a suppressed weapon, and immediately just feel that kick in and punch in the back straight away. I'm going to switch to balance mode now, and now I can feel a very subtle sort of thumping in the middle of my back while I'm running along. But it's intermittent. It doesn't seem to be constant, so it's not consistent. And then when you're shooting, you can feel it a bit more aggressively, but not majorly aggressively, I don't think. Just a little slight pounding when I'm running along, and perhaps this is better. It's going to be down to personal preference whether you want to feel your footsteps or not, but I definitely can now. And then if we go into dynamic mode, again, I can't feel my footsteps now. Slight occasionally feel it, but not as regularly as they just were. So I'm not feeling anything right this second. There's no vibrations at all coming through from it. Just going to switch to the MP5. Just because it's a bit louder. And I'm dead. Now, I definitely felt the vibrations of his shots on me. So when he was firing at me, I definitely felt that vibration a lot in there. You could really feel that just rumbling through the various parts. Terrible shooting on my part, but I was concentrating on doing multiple things at once. So now I'm going back in with an auto shotgun, which is hopefully an auto. Yes, it is. And we're on dynamic mode again. Again, I'm not feeling anything currently as I'm moving around in the world. I did hear enemies. So there should be a fight any second now. Oh, suppressed shots. And that was interesting because there's suppressed shots over there and I can feel it rumbling. So I'm actually feeling that from a distance, which is obviously part of the immersion of the experience. Oh, I can hear them. You can feel the shotgun blast from the shotgun that's being fired. It's not even being fired at me, but I can feel it. Definitely felt that too. Oh. Reload, damn it. Ah! Oh. Felt the grenade blow off as well. And then the rumble of the disappointment music at the end. So now I'm in Indiana Jones and stealing stuff.
Wasn't there an excavation led by some British professor?
I'm not really feeling anything on the controlled mode. At least in this sort of movement here. But let's start punching people. You can definitely feel some of the action there. Can feel the vibrations in my lower back and the back of the legs, which is obviously consistently where it's going to be. You don't really feel much in the upper back, or at least I'm not. It's more in the middle or lower than anything else, and then a subtle rumble. And switch to balance mode, and now because it's based on music, I'm feeling it a lot more. So it's really rumbling a lot because it's a dramatic music playing. Sort of, oh, I'm in trouble. So now I can feel it just rumbling across my lower back basically constantly, and now it's in the bottom of my legs for some reason, so it's moving around in interesting ways. Quite aggressive rumbling in the lower legs, which obviously doesn't relate to anything particularly, so it's not like it's related to anything that's happening in the game. It's not I've suddenly hit damage to the lower legs. And I'm punching this guy and I'm feeling it more in the lower legs than anything else. And you'd think you'd feel that more in the back and the shoulders and everywhere else. So obviously because it's based on audio and nothing else currently, because there are going to be some games which support it, but this one's just doing it based on audio. And now if we switch to dynamic mode instead, just fighting everybody. Chinning fascists all over the place. Yeah, come on up, mate.
They're finished.
So dynamic is quite aggressive, basically. I'm feeling it a lot more aggression in there. You can feel it rumbling in the back and the legs quite a lot as you move around the world. And even if I just stand still, because there's music playing, you can feel that vibrating too. So it's just this dramatic music happening, and then you've got the rumbling in the haptics because of it. And now the music's calmed down, I'm now not feeling anything. So I suppose that adds to the immersion, but it's perhaps confusing in some ways, because obviously that's just based off the music and not actually what you're doing. Like, if I swing punches, I can feel that as well. So I can feel some of that happening. And then when he does that sort of I'm tired, run out of stamina noise, feel that more significantly vibrating than with the actual punches, which is interesting. So I'm now trying Battlefield 2042 because I wanted to see what the experience would be like in a tank, because obviously tanks can be thundering along. So it's start on control mode, and I'm actually feeling more of the rumbles, just like doo-doo, 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 rather than as you'd expect, consistently rumbling along, rumble, 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 rumble. It's not really doing that as quite so much. Obviously if you fire off a shell though, it's a different story. It's a big fat thunk in that one as you'd expect. So there's definitely a lot of constant vibrations in this mode like this. And it does certainly add to it, I think, but it's just not as much as I'd expected. But then it is in controlled mode currently, so that might be part of the reason why. So now into a helicopter and balance mode. In a helicopter with balance, I'm definitely feeling basically vibrating constantly in my lower back, pretty consistently. Feels good, but definitely more noticeable. And this actually does feel quite aggressive in terms of what it's doing with the vibrations, but in a quite satisfying way. Definitely feeling like the harm more in the way that you'd expect. Makes sense that these engine noises and the sound of the blades then lead to this more aggressive feeling of flying. I can feel it really vibrating constantly in my lower back, and a bit less but equally in my legs, a bit more subtle in the legs, but it's still doing it. And then when you start to make hits with the rockets, you can feel thud, 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 a bit more substantially. Not as much as you'd think, actually. So it is very wildly. But it definitely does add to it. It definitely does add to the immersion and the feeling of like being in the helicopter, I'm sure. So now I'm on foot in dynamic mode, and it's hard to tell whether I can feel my footsteps or not, because basically you just feel vibrations constantly because there's so much sounds going on in an environment like this. I think with a game like Battlefield where there's constant gunfire happening, you're probably going to feel constant rumblings. I'm certainly feeling it in dynamic mode anyway. It's just constantly vibrating as I'm walking around, as I'm going place to place, because of all the gunfire that's happening.
Disregard.
So I can feel that if I stand still a minute, I can feel like a of like tanks firing nearby, the guns being fired, and the rumbles of the world. So I think like dynamic mode is actually pretty good for this. Although you do have to be aware that you are going to be constantly vibrated again, I think after a few hours of play like this, you'll probably find it a bit too much. And interesting to see what that experience is like. So it's been quite a long video, apologies for that, but hopefully you've made it this far so I can talk to you about an overall sort of summary of my experience. And what I wanted to do was to give you a variety of different games and talk about how each of them has been and what my experience with Freyja was like. Now, the initial impression that I had with Freyja was that it was sort of maybe gimmicky, perhaps a bit too subtle, and not that interesting. But then the more I played, the more I got pulled into it, the more I found it really added to the experience. If you enjoy an immersive, atmospheric experience like Stalker 2, for example, something where, you know, it's reasonably subtle most of the time, then all of a sudden you have a big jump scare or something really important happens, then Freyja helps to add to that because it just adds to that sort of immersion, that moment, that experience in the game, and it really adds to it, and it is fantastic in that way. On the other hand, if you've got a game like Battlefield, for example, where it's constantly big noise from loads of different directions, you then can't feel your footsteps. The vibrations are dictated by a lot of what's happening in the environment. It's less about your experience and more about the overall sort of environmental sounds. And that's sometimes a problem with environmental audio. So with the Indiana Jones clips, for example, I found where the gameplay audio was suddenly picking up, where music was picking up, for example, the Freyja started vibrating more. And that related less to what I was doing or what was happening, but more just sort of dramatic music, which wasn't as immersive. Now, if you look at Razer's website, there's an official list of supported games, which includes about 20-ish. Some are marked as coming soon. Stalker 2 is one of those, Hitman, and then the new Sniper Elite Resistance game, that's also marked as coming soon. So they're going to have official support where it's going to be integrated into the game. Unfortunately, I don't have any of the games that are listed as actually working at the moment. Hogwarts Legacy is one of them, which apparently is quite good. I'd imagine if it's fully programmed in and then Freyja reacts to specific things rather than just sound, then it could be superior. Also, it really depends on the other games you're playing and what your game preference is. I think if you're playing racing games a lot, for example, yes, you'll feel the vibrations of the engines of the cars. That might be good. It might be too much over a long period of time. I have certainly found it really thrilling. I actually am more impressed by it than I thought I would be. It's also really good for music. If you're just listening to Spotify with the chair going, you can just feel that vibration. It adds to the thumping. If you like a lot of bass in your music anyway, it adds to that overall experience. It's very satisfying. It's very comfortable. Because you've got multiple vibration points on it. You know, you've got the back of the legs, left leg, right leg, lower back, upper back. You feel it in different places. It vibrates through it. It revolves round through there. It's also comfortable to sit on. There's no problems with discomfort sitting on it for hours on end, so I don't feel like I have to take it off the chair when I'm not using it, for example, when it's not turned on. So overall, it's been a great experience in a number of different ways. It really adds to the immersion, and it really is something. It is, however, really expensive, but that's classic Razer pricing. And would I recommend buying it? If you've got a lot of money and you really want to add some extra level of immersion to your gaming experience that you haven't had before, beyond RGB lighting or a decent headset or a flash monitor, then this might be worth spending on. Actually, it's pretty nice. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm going to continue enjoying it as well, hopefully. This has been The Provoked Prawn. I hope you found this useful. Check out the links in the description to find out more. Check out the list of compatible games, for example. By the time you watch this video, that list might have expanded. Hopefully you found these useful. Thanks very much for watching.